Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Engage podcast. It's fantastic to be back with you. We're back in Christchurch, Haywards Heath. We had wonderful surroundings for our last podcast in the beautiful Christian Conference Centre north of Northampton. But we are back to reality. It's a lovely church. The building's nice. It's not quite as fancy as where we were on the last podcast, is it?
No, I think that's probably fair.
And the last podcast did very well. Thank you, everyone, for engaging, for watching, for listening. I am slightly worried that it was the environment rather than the content.
You know, that thumbnail, it would have enticed people in.
Well, exactly. And here we are back in more humble surroundings. Now, this is actually going to be our last podcast before Easter. That's because... number of reasons. One, Easter bank holidays, plus Peter's having some holiday. And I'm also giving 3 seminars at Rising Lights, which is a big Christian festival taking place for the very first time in Torquay from the 6th to the 10th of April. So if you are heading to Rising Lights, you could do one thing for this poor, humble podcast host. You could choose to come along on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday afternoon to my seminar track, where we'll be exploring the Bible's better story about human life. And there's so much good news to share, and updates on political situations, and a look at worldviews. It's going to be fantastic, but please come, because I am slightly concerned that because I've been given the graveyard shift of the afternoon, no one will be there. So please come. I'm not even pretending. I'm not even trying to play it cool. I'm actually now, I've gone straight past asking to begging.
Yeah, I was going to say you're really laying on the emotional blackmail. It's like the bit from Notting Hill. You're just a poor boy standing in front of a camera asking the audience
to come to my
love
seminars. Yes, I'm just a poor boy standing in front of the camera saying, please spend Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday afternoon for 75 minutes each time thinking about the lovely topics of abortion and assisted suicide. I do sometimes feel like this. This is the topics I go around the country speaking about. And sometimes I'm like, I'd never had a moment in my life where I thought that would be how I spend, my early 30s. I just never thought I'd be going around speaking on those topics. But, you speak on what the Lord gives you to speak on.
Well, that's right, isn't it? And God always knows what His plan is, even when we don't know what's going on.
That's very true. And it was also, we do believe on this podcast in the sovereignty of God. So everything is under that wonderful sovereignty, which is a wonderful comfort. And we've referred to that many times on this podcast, but it involves both the big and the small. And you might have noticed that Peter and I are clutching these microphones in our hands. That too is under the purposeful sovereignty of the Lord. It wasn't my plan to come here and hold this microphone like this, but I'll take this one. Our producer announced that this is what they're doing on the Cool podcast. Now, just think for a moment. The implication is we're not a cool podcast. And I am appalled at this. I'm also appalled that I'm holding this thing in my hand because, frankly, it's really quite heavy. How is it going for you, Peter?
I've got to say, I do think it's quite cumbersome.
I mean, you're going for the two.
I'm resting it down when I'm not using it.
Yes, that's it. So we're going to try this. Why don't you give us feedback on the microphones and the hand-holding? And you might want to, we won't give his name away, but you might just want to say, what do you think of the producer in light of what he's made us do? I just throw that out there. Why don't you put some comments? What do you think about the new look that we're going for? Anyway, that's enough about the visuals.
I've got to say, when you started talking about the sovereignty of God,
yes,
and you'd done your setup on life issues,
yes.
I thought you were going to segue into
you
our
thought
first
it was a segue.
topic.
No, we cannot get into the meat of this podcast without at least commenting on this and the fact that I'm going to have to do that and the fact that you're clutching it like that because your arm's already sore. So is mine, by the way. So I just wanted to put that on record. Now we've done that. Why don't we get on with the meat of this podcast? Because we're actually going to start with something that we don't always get to start with on the Engage podcast. Why don't we start with a win?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Peter, why don't you tell our wonderful listeners and all those watching, if this is your first time with us, this is the Engage podcast brought to you by Christian Action Research and Education Care. My name's James.
I'm Peter.
And we're the co-hosts of this podcast with our wonderful producer, Isaac, in the background. And we're going to talk about...
we're going to talk about the win in the Scottish Parliament on assisted suicide.
Who'd have thought it, Peter? Who would have thought it?
Well, not I.
No. When did you find out? Were you watching it live? Did you wake up in the night?
I was I was at the Watford game, and of course there is famously no signal at football grounds. But as I was leaving the ground, because I'm part of one of these assisted suicide campaign groups, WhatsApp groups.
Oh, that is a rare privilege.
So I was following things as they were coming in.
Okay.
And the last I had heard was when someone posted that they thought the numbers would be level, at which case we would win. So I was thinking, okay, we're looking pretty good here.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting the result to be quite what it was. So what did I fill in some of the details. So this was a vote on Tuesday, the 17th of March. So last week, as we are recording now. The bill was put forward by the Lib Dem MSP Liam MacArthur. It had passed its stage 1 vote back in May last year by 70 votes to 56. So it wasn't sort of on a knife edge back then. It was a close, but not necessarily that close.
And I'll just add into that since devolution in 1999, there have been 3 assisted suicide bills in the Scottish Parliament. The first one, I think, was defeated by something like 82 to 16. The second one was defeated by 82 to 32, or something like that. So there was a slight uptick in support. Yeah. But they were both defeated at the stage 1, which is what you've just mentioned.
Exactly.
So the key thing here is that the Liam MacArthur bill, for the first time ever, an assisted suicide bill passed stage 1.
Yes. And so I remember having a conversation with a Christian MSP just a few days after that stage 1 vote. And effectively, they told me how discouraged they were because they thought it would, even if they lost, they thought it would be much closer. Well, the vote last week, the result went a different way. So there were 12 MSPs who switched from supporting the bill in principle at stage 1. So stage 1 tends to be a vote on the principle or something. You then go through various amendments, and then stage 3 is the vote on the final bill. And at stage 3, the Scottish Parliament rejected assisted dying by or assisted suicide as we know it, by 69 votes
Good
to
catch.
57.
Yes,
Indeed.
Yes, that was a close one, Peter, if I'm honest. Yeah. I mean, it is worth saying that assisted suicide in Scotland, after the stage 1, you mentioned the MSP that you spoke to, I think a lot of us thought this is now a done deal.
Yeah.
All that was needed was 7 members of the Scottish Parliament to change their vote, because 70 then becomes 63. If you take those 7 and they join the other side, you've got 63. And in that situation, the presiding officer gets the casting vote. But by convention, they will always back what's called the status quo. So in other words, no assisted suicide bill. On the actual day, I remember, I was following it live. I was on X. I was chatting to our team in Scotland who were actually in the public gallery when this was being debated. And Stuart Weir, our head of care for Scotland, described the atmosphere as incredibly intense, very heavy, very emotively charged. And that was partly because MSPs were feeling the weight of what they were debating. This was a bill fundamentally about giving the state the legal right to help patients kill themselves for the first time ever in Scotland. But also in the gallery, you had pro-bill supporters, you had anti-bill supporters. And so you could really sense that this was going to be a knife-edge result, or so we thought. And right up to the very end, our intelligence was telling us that we were going to win. Either it was going to be a tie or we were going to win by 1 vote. Yeah. That's what we thought. That's where we're at, because in the weeks coming up to the vote, we needed 7 MSPs to turn. In the end, 4 went on the public record to say that they were going to vote against the bill, having voted for it at stage 1. Well, 4 is not 7. So we still needed 3 to put their hand up in the debate and go, I've changed my mind. And by the way, that is not an easy thing to say. Yeah. I mean, it should be a much easier thing to say in debates, but it's not an easy thing to say. And so there we were. It was around about 10 o'clock at night. And when the presiding officer, she actually read a number of different, the way it works in the Scottish Parliament is you do all the voting in a batch. So they'd already debated a number of other pieces of legislation. So she read the results for those bills first. And of course, the margins were vastly different. And so it was kind of this slow, torturous process. And then she came to it. And when she said the words, what was the final result? It was 69-57. When she said those words, it was colleagues in Scotland, I mean, bless them, there was absolute elation, but also immediately an awareness that there were lots of people around them who were not feeling the same. Yeah. So fair play to them for that. I think I would have been terrible in that situation. I think I would have been like, get in, come on. I would have probably, been full on Glasgow, even though I'm from Edinburgh. And I would have got my real Scotsman would have come out and I would have been waving the bunting and but they actually played it really well. Yeah. And what I love is that they then went to the pub. And they just had a quiet drink together just to celebrate God's goodness. Isn't that a wonderful thing? I got major FOMO at that point. Sorry, Peter, I've completely interrupted your telling of the story.
And I'm just
going to grab my coffee as well.
In a sense, once it's happened, that is a kind of a clear ending point of the story. I guess it is worth noting there are lots of similarities between this legislation and the lead visa bill. So there was a similar setup to the bill that you had to be terminally ill, you had to be expected to die within 6 months. I think that was only added in an amendment, wasn't it? That wasn't originally part of the bill. You had to be mentally competent. You had to have lived in Scotland for at least 12 months. The lethal drugs would have to be self-administered as well. So lots of similarities with the lead visa bill. Again, alongside that come lots of the same flaws as well. So how can you stop coercion? Coercion isn't always stated. Sometimes there's almost a kind of societal feeling. Wouldn't it be better if I wasn't here? What are the ways in which this is going to be expanded over the years? What is the impact on disabled people going to be?
And actually just on that, I think two of the most powerful and impressive speeches in that Stage 3 debate, one was from Jeremy Balfour, who's a great friend of CARE's, has taken interns from our leadership programme in the past, but also will be stepping down at the next Scottish election, a real loss to Scottish politics, now currently sitting as an independent. Jeremy lives with a disability, and he stood up and he challenged his colleagues and said, how do you think I am going to feel tomorrow if you pass this bill? Because the implicit messaging of assisted suicide is absolutely some lives are more worthy than others.
Completely.
And it runs counter to all our thinking and the progression that we've made in society about trying to better understand what life is like for those with disabilities and trying to accommodate more and trying to say and send them the message that they are as much a part of our society as we are, if we're able-bodied, as it were. So I found that very, very, very impressive. And then one more shout out to Pam Duncan-Glancy, who gave an amazing speech. And I think both of them living with disability and yet able to speak so personally into a debate that was clearly personal for them.
Completely. So she said, or she talked about it was really important that MSPs would choose to make it easier to live than to die.
Yes.
And actually, I think that sort of gets to the heart of lots of people's fears about this.
Yes.
And not necessarily just for those with disabilities, but for instance, when you're looking at the end of life and then people need palliative care treatment and it hasn't always been available.
That's
and how,
right.
Therefore, is it a choice for someone if they don't have the choice in the first place to have palliative care?
That's right. This was highlighted in the debate because Edward Mountain, who's a Scottish Conservative MSP, he pointed out that 14,000 Scots die each year without adequate palliative care.
There you go.
We've always talked about the fact that palliative care in this country is a bit of a postcode lottery.
Yeah.
Not just in Scotland, but in England and Wales as well. And I think this... Gordon Brown came out after the result in Scotland, former Prime Minister, a proud Scotsman, and immediately said we now need to have a conversation about palliative care and the provision of it. And that is absolutely true.
Well, yeah, I think it is really important that we don't actually just think our job is done here. In that, as Christians, we are not just against things, we are for other things.
Yes.
So we are against bad legislation, which will lead towards death. We are for palliative care.
Yeah. Bless you.
I do apologise.
Bless you. Do you need some palliative care yourself?
Not yet.
Goodness me. I mean, so I think it's very easy for us to kind of miss the fact that one of the things that made this so astonishing is that the Scottish Parliament is known, both within the Parliament but also across the UK, as being on the more progressive end when it comes to different social issues.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of... If you think about what they tried to do under Nicola Sturgeon with the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which they did pass, which made it easier to legally change your gender, was then blocked by the UK government. And that was just one example of a trend that you can observe in the Scottish Parliament over the 25, 26 years that devolution has existed. So for them to vote for assisted suicide at stage 1 and then for enough MSPs to change their mind, cross-party MSPs as well, I think it's easy for us perhaps if we're watching and we're from England or we're from other parts of the world, it's easy for us to miss just how amazing a result this is. There is an element of the miraculous about this.
There is. I'll come on to that in just a second. I think one of the interesting differences actually between the Scottish Parliament currently and the UK Parliament is essentially in its makeup. So if you were to look at the number of Lib Dems in the Westminster Parliament, where there were how many MPs are there? About 70.
About 72, I think.
And I think only about 12 of them opposed the assisted suicide legislation down here.
Yes.
Well, I wonder whether in Scotland the makeup of Parliament is slightly different.
Yes.
So in Scottish Labour compared to the Westminster Labour, I think it was only 3 of the 20 MSPs ended up supporting the MacArthur Bill. It was much more even when it came to Labour. Fewer Lib Dems again.
Lib Dems, just worth pointing out, Lee MacArthur is a member of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and therefore you would expect and can understand why some within his party would vote with him, even if they weren't completely convinced, almost as an act of sort of support and solidarity. But I just want to give a shout out to Beatrice, who's a Scottish Liberal Democrat MSP for the Shetland Islands, who voted consistently against this bill. She was the only one of the 5 Scottish Liberal Democrat MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who voted against. Everyone else voted for. And I imagine the pressure on her must have been quite enormous, because there is that element, isn't there, of he's in Liam McCarthy's, he's in the same party. Do I owe him some loyalty in that sense? And so I was actually really impressed and encouraged that one of them had the courage to put their hand up and go, I'm not going to go with this. I don't think this is right.
Yeah. So I guess the point is, if there are, say, around 70 Lib Dems out of 630 odd MPs.
Yes.
Whereas in Scotland, there are only 5 Lib Dem MSPs out of how
129.
120.
Yeah.
So you got a smaller proportion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, I think that political philosophy particularly would lend itself to supporting this legislation, as it has done down here. So I think the makeup of the Parliament is slightly different.
Definitely.
But to come on to your point about it feeling miraculous, it absolutely does feel like that. And it's actually the second time, even in the last 3 years, while I've been at CARE, where there's been an initial result in Scotland, which I thought, oh, gosh, that is really bad news. The first one being the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. And now this, where it's, you would thought, gosh, this is really terrible news. I can't see how it could possibly be overturned.
Yes.
And yet that is what has happened.
That is absolutely right. And I think, the great thing about the Bible is that it teaches the sovereignty of God, but also the responsibility of human beings. And so it is right, as well as acknowledging the sovereignty of God in this. The hearts of all people are in his hands. He turns them as he pleases. But also, he works through his people. And I just want to pay tribute, not just to CARE colleagues, Stuart Weir and Michael Veitch, and a former colleague who worked incredibly hard in Scotland, but also to people like Gordon MacDonald, the chief exec of Care Not Killing, Dr. Gillian Wright from Our Duty of Care, because a number of them, particularly Stuart and Michael, they toured the country, going to churches from Inverness down to Dumfries on the Scottish borders, left coast, right coast, or west coast, east coast, north and south, to rally the church. And actually, I think in terms of how engaged the church was, both in writing to MSPs, but also in praying about this issue. So even the day before the big vote in Holyrood, there was a special prayer meeting. I think it was hosted by Elim in Edinburgh. And Christians came together to pray. And I think, these things have all contributed to the outcome. This is the Lord choosing to work through his people. And at CARE, we're passionate about Christians getting involved in politics. We think we mustn't leave politics alone and just disengage, but actually it's part of our calling as stewards of the world around us, as salt and light, followers of Jesus. And I think a result like this, miraculous, yes, but also the result of hard yards. So the debate in Scotland has been rumbling on for 5 years. MacArthur introduced his bill to Parliament in 2023, but it was in 2021 that he started talking about the idea. And so for 5 long years, the team have poured everything into resisting this and worked brilliantly with other organizations. And it is a reminder of what Christians can contribute to ongoing policy debates, that the trajectory is not that we will always lose. We can, we do still win. I just think that's so encouraging.
Yeah, they're absolutely right. And I think we also want to send out a massive thank you to everyone who has prayed along with us over these last few months as well.
100%.
As Christians, we do believe that prayer is powerful, and we believe that in some mysterious way, which we cannot fully understand side of the veil, that God does take it into account, and he does do miraculous things when Christians pray. This is a slight tangent, but it's another thing which was called a miracle, and in some ways I think it's a good example of when Christians pray, God does amazing things. And you'll like this because it's a World War II story. Which was, do you know about the National Day of Prayer
I do.
the Second World War?
I do, yes.
Yeah, so this would have been when the British Army was trapped at Dunkirk. And so millions of people headed to the churches. King George called for a National Day of Prayer. And there was a queue at Westminster Abbey, and it was a quarter of a mile long.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 335,000 soldiers evacuated to safety. Yeah. And it was called the miracle at Dunkirk. When Christians pray, God answers, and he does amazing things.
It's funny, isn't it? Because sometimes in the small things of life, we pray and the Lord answers, and we're almost like, oh gosh, that's brilliant. Oh, wow, yeah. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, the amount of times I thought, I should have prayed earlier, shouldn't I?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's right. And I think prayer has always been, it's part of what a Christian campaigning group like CARE can bring to the table that is distinct from any secular campaigning group. They may have all the flash, they may have all the cash. And it is worth saying that, at CARE we work on more than one issue. We engage churches, we raise up new generations of leaders through our leadership program. We have an open ministry that supports women post-abortion. All of that costs money and resource. We can't just orientate all of our funding to one issue. We have to spread it. Whereas we were up against an incredibly well-funded opponent in Dignity in Dying who had enough money to do wraparound advertisements in the media in Scotland, in the national newspapers, in the days running up to the vote. I mean, that's the kind of advertising we could only dream of. But there is a principle in Scripture, isn't there, that the Lord confounds the plans and the wisdom of the worldly wise, and he uses the small and the weak things of this world to shame the wise. Yeah. So if you looked at it on that level, the other side should have won, but they didn't. Yeah. And I find that so compelling. And whenever I think about the issue of assisted suicide, I think my understanding about this has become clearer over the years. I think I always struggled with the argument that even with the very best palliative care available, that there would always be some who would experience unbearable pain. And I used to run from that and try and avoid it and ignore it. But I've come round to the view now more that fundamentally, the thing that we as Christians, we as the church have to do alongside promoting palliative care, alongside standing against assisted suicide, is to be very careful about the words that we use and to explain the words that we use. So take assisted dying. That term was deliberately deployed in 2006 by Dignity in Dying, who formerly were known as the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, to make death sound palatable. And that's why at CARE we are so hot and so strict on always calling it assisted suicide, because you should call things what they are. But the other word that gets used all the time in this debate is the word compassion. Yeah. And I've been really helped by John Wyatt and his thinking in this area, that compassion really means to suffer with someone. And it struck me just recently that if we legalize assisted suicide, we are not only harming the individual who wants it, we're actually also denying their friends and their family, their neighbors, an opportunity to really suffer with, to actually show compassion. And it's a good example of society that rejects God recreating or decreating what God has said is real, what God has said is good. They make their own reality, where compassion involves giving lethal drugs to a very, very sick man or woman and allowing them to that, and potentially even, and this was never clarified, by the way, potentially even helping them to take the drugs if they can't do it themselves, which is euthanasia, not assisted suicide. Christian compassion would always say, however long this takes, however painful it is, we will do all we can to help your physical pain, but we recognize that your pain may be total. Yeah. Therefore, it's spiritual, it's relational, it's psychological, and we are going to do all we can to help you at that level as well. And I was really kind of in this recent debate just struck again by when we use words, let's understand them and let's use them wisely.
Yeah. Worth saying, again, this is not the only assisted suicide bill out there. So please do keep on praying around the Leadbeater bill down in Westminster. It currently looks like it's going to run out of time, which would be really, really positive.
To coin a phrase, time will tell.
Indeed. But do please keep on praying over that. Shall we go on to another story from last week as well? Because it wasn't all good news last week.
And you're right. No, we should. And actually, do you know, last week was and I'll talk about this at probably in lots of settings, but maybe especially now, but also at Rising Lights. It was such a good illustration of the reality of Christian advocacy.
Yes, I thought that's
and Christian engagement. You win some, you lose some, and that's a general principle. But no sooner, and this has happened to me so many times at CARE, no sooner are we praising God and rejoicing together. And our team call on Wednesday morning, I wouldn't describe it as triumphalistic. I would say there was just a palpable sense of wonder and amazement and thanksgiving to God for the result. But Wednesday night in the House of Lords had an opportunity to vote for amendments that would have done two things. One amendment would have removed the provisions in the Crime and Policing Bill that will decriminalise abortion up to birth for women who self-administer their own abortion for any reason right up to birth to not face any criminal sanction at all. This amendment would have removed that clause from the bill. And the other amendment sought to reinstate in-person medical consultations for any woman looking to have an abortion. And the House of Lords rejected both those opportunities, which means that provided a miracle does not happen, abortion law will change in this country. And right up to the point of birth, a woman can essentially conduct an illegal abortion using abortion pills at home, do it herself, right up to the day she's due to give birth and face no criminal sanction at all. It could be for any reason. It could be because the baby inside is a girl and they want a boy.
Yeah.
And it is really shocking.
It is, it's tragic and it is really quite dystopian, I think. The phrase which came to my mind when I was chatting about it last week, about the juxtaposition of the two results side by side was we really do live in the now and the not yet, don't we?
Yeah, that's good.
Where we see moments where God's kingdom breaks in, and we think this is fantastic. But we're also not there yet. We're not at that point of consummation or new creation.
No.
And so we do encounter these real setbacks, and that can be really, really painful. I think just to sort of sketch out a few more of the details and a bit of background to this vote. So it will not be legal for a doctor to provide drugs after that 24-week limit.
Yep.
But the reason why this has come up is since the pills by post scheme was introduced, which was introduced in response to the pandemic, doctors are not required to have an in-person consultation with a woman who is pregnant. If you have an in-person consultation, then you're much more likely to be able to tell how far advanced someone is in the pregnancy, whereas over a Zoom call, you might not necessarily have quite the same contact with someone. And therefore, pills have been sent in the post, which women have then been self-administering themselves. That has led to an increase in women who have been having an abortion after that 24-week limit. And some of these cases are really, really tragic and really, really awful to read about. But the idea that a woman could have an abortion up to full term for any reason whatsoever, I think shows a real naivety about human nature. Because no one is saying that most women will look to do that. No one is saying that most women are bad actors. I think what we are actually saying is most women are not bad actors. But what we are saying is that there will always be some cases where, because we live in a fallen world, people will abuse the laws which are there and therefore will commit evil, and that is just the reality of human life.
That's right. And I think the other thing that's worth saying is there is a kind of another tragic irony here, which is if you go back to the debates in the 60s about the Abortion Act, the justification for that was dodgy, dangerous backstreet abortions. But by introducing the pills by post, we have seen an increase in medical complications, sometimes with tragic effects, not just for babies, but also for women as well. And so I found it really sad that this was purportedly to be about protecting women. This was to be about the safety of women, as it were. And also it's in a bill that within its explanatory notes, the Crime and Policing Bill is supposed to be making our streets safer for women and girls especially. And I found it tragic that we've actually passed legislation by refusing to reinstate in-person consultations, which would have been a very modest change. I think we're going to harm babies and we're going to harm women as well.
Yeah.
And I think the only other thing I'd add is some have rightly said, well, this isn't really changing much because the 24-week limit stays in place. And that is true. However, every law that we pass sends a message.
Yeah, subliminal message.
And one of the subliminal messages of this law change, if it indeed becomes on the statute book and gets royal assent, is we have basically removed most of the final legal protections in law for preborn babies. We've said that for some preborn babies, depending on the action of the mother, they don't have any recognition in the law at all, any protection. And again, if you go back to the time limit in 1967, that was set at 28 weeks because that was the known point of viability. In 1990, they reduced the time limit. Lord Alton, amazing pro-life champion, he led the charge. The government accepted, and it was lowered from 28 to 24 because science had moved on, and it was now clear that that was the point of viability. We now have medical bodies producing new guidance on how to help babies born at 21 or 22 weeks stay alive. But in 2023-24, when our colleague, Caroline Ansell, introduced a bill to lower the time limit from 20, well, it might have been an amendment, I can't remember, from 24 to 22, it didn't go to a vote because of the snap election that Rishi Sunak called, but she knew that MPs were going to resist it.
Yeah.
And so there's this really, really dangerous messaging that we've now sent that essentially you can be a baby that is on the cusp of emerging from the womb, but according to the law, your life can be taken, and the person who takes your life will face no criminal sanction, even if the doctor who helped provide the pills does. And sorry, one final thing, Peter, and then I will shut up and let you speak. We know what pro-abortion campaigners now want. We know that it will not be long before they are pushing for the doctors and the medical professionals to be decriminalised as well, because they have said that is what they want. So it is all very bleak.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see the inconsistencies in that. So you could have a baby who was born prematurely, say at 33, 34 weeks.
I was premature, incredibly premature.
And yet, obviously, if someone wished to harm that baby who had been born, then obviously someone does face criminal sanctions. Yes. You could have a baby who is in the womb at 36 weeks, where someone has a late-term abortion, and they would not be criminally liable. So there is a clear inconsistency in that. I mean, I think the phrase which really came to mind for me when I was thinking about it was this is, in some ways, the campaigners have seen that there is a problem. They've identified the right problem and they've come up with the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So it's the wrong answer to the right question.
And I think, as a colleague of ours said, actually, again, this was the desperate sadness of the rejection of Baroness Stroud's amendment.
Completely.
Is that in-person consultations is the answer to the concerns about women managing to procure pills, taking them at a late stage and having a dreadful and dangerous, life-threatening experience for them and for the baby.
Yeah.
And yet Parliament, it just cannot be motivated to move at all in even the most modest pro-life direction in the House of Lords or the House of Commons. And you mentioned it already, the bizarre kind of, we'll affirm life at the end, we'll look to protect against coercion, against abuse, we'll say that the assisted suicide legislation doesn't meet enough thresholds, so therefore we'll resist it. We're not going to cross that Rubicon. But because the abortion Rubicon was crossed decades ago, it's just such a settled consensus, it seems, in Parliament. and it's even out of step with public opinion.
Well, yeah, I was going to come on to that as well. So I think it's only 1% of women actually want abortion to be legal up to birth.
Yes,
like this is not actually a popular policy.
No, that's right.
But I think it almost exposes the problem with the way in which lots of MPs think today, which is they chase the progressive headline as opposed to the reality of the nitty-gritty of legislation.
Yes, that's right.
No MP wants to be seen to be anti-women. And they know that is a way in which something will be reported.
Yes.
And so you end up with bad laws as opposed to thought through legislation which actually serves a purpose.
And for me, the result on Wednesday night, where it was the House of Lords, they did debate for a good number of hours compared to a 46-minute debate on decriminalisation in the House of Commons. No scrutiny, no committee stage, no external evidence taken, just a 46-minute debate. The House of Lords at least debated this for a bit longer. But it is strange that the House of Lords, which we are lauding at the moment for scrutiny, not sabotage, scrutiny of the assisted suicide legislation, because that is a private member's bill, perhaps that affords them that extra degree of protection, whereas this was tagged onto a government bill. And I think it is legitimate to say the 1967 Abortion Act was passed via a private member's bill. Is it not the case that when it comes to making a pretty seismic change in our abortion law, I mean, this is the biggest change for decades, is it not the case for saying that you shouldn't be doing that via an amendment to a government bill that's purported to be about something else? That at the very least, if we're going to debate these things, it should be debated in Westminster halls, it should be debated via the private members bill, because if it does carry parliamentary support, private members bills can and do become law. So that would be my other side of this, is that I think the way Parliament has done this from a process point of view speaks to how little they seem to really care about the issue of abortion, and that's just tragic.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Yes, we're doing all the, from the high of defeating assisted suicide to the low of abortion, and then to one where I actually very deliberately didn't ask you what you thought about this, because I want to see where we both land.
Go on.
So this is the issue of a mass Muslim prayer event being held in Trafalgar Square in central London. The mayor, Sadiq Khan, who is himself a Muslim, attended. And this drew the ire of Nick Timothy, the Shadow Justice spokesman from the Conservative Party, who said that to hold this mass Muslim prayer event in central London, right by a Christian church, St. Martin in the Fields, was an act of domination.
I've got a few quotes from him.
Mass ritual in public places is an act of domination. The Adhan, which declares there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, is, when called in a public place, a declaration of domination.
And division.
I didn't get that, but I just got the domination bit. So there you go, Peter. So what do you think? Is he right? Is he wrong? Is he part right? Is he part wrong?
I think I do know which way I lean on this. It took me a little while to kind of sort through my thinking on it.
I wonder if it's helpful. Should we sketch out the two directions you could go?
Go on, man.
Well, there may be more, but just and then you say which one you lean to and why.
Sure.
So as I understand it, you can either go down the direction that, say, Jonathan Sacerdoti went down in The Spectator, which is the specific nature of Islam, the way in which it is a religion that does seek to proselytize and seek political influence and power via the sword, depending on who you speak to. That therefore, that is to have this kind of public prayer that says there's no God but Allah and so on. That is materially different from, say, a Jewish public festival or a Jewish public prayer event, because Judaism doesn't seek to convert people. In fact, it actively discourages conversion to Judaism, depending on which tenet you listen to. And he also seemed to argue that it was different from Christianity as well. And I was a little bit more hazy about how he got there. And so anyway, that would be one way of looking at it, to say, well, the obvious counter is, hold on. Christians do big events at Christmas time. We do carol services. They're broadcast on the BBC. Jewish people at different times in their particular festivals, they do public events. And Jonathan's point is, but the nature of Islam and some of the particular tenets included within Islam make this different, and therefore Nick Timothy is simply trying to start a debate. That's one view. You could then take the other view, which is, are we not for religious freedom?
Yeah.
Are we not for religious tolerance?
Yeah.
And we as Christians especially, we can't be out there complaining about this when we demand the same rights and the same freedoms for ourselves.
Yeah.
You could say, well, this is a Christian country, and so therefore Christianity should be privileged over other faiths and religions. This is touching on Christian nationalism. So they're the kind of two, as I looked at it, they were the two main responses you could have. So where do you lean?
I have ended up leaning towards the second of those, and I'll explain why.
I do as well. It's happened. I really thought we might end up in a slightly different place on this, but okay, let's go. Let's unpack it.
I think we can come on to the nature of Islam in a little bit, because
yes.
I do think there are some important things to recognise in it. But yeah, I really struggle to see how we can say that we are loving our neighbour as ourselves if we are unwilling, when we ourselves have a passion play in Trafalgar Square, and there are several other religious events which are held there. So there are events not actually just around, not just Christian events. So there are Diwali events and Vaisakhi events and Hanukkah events. I really struggle to see how we can say that we're loving our neighbour as ourselves if we want those, and then we are going to say, to single out one religious group and say actually they shouldn't be allowed to participate in public, particularly given this was not like some ad hoc thing. This is something which they have got permission for.
Yeah.
And so I just can't, I cannot see how to deny that ultimately it is not claiming one thing for us and not for a different group.
And I would just add to that as well. I completely agree. To me, some of the reaction that I saw clearly coming from a kind of a Christian nationalist perspective.
Yeah.
Where you absolutely want Christianity to be privileged.
Yeah.
You make no bones about it. Now, that is, let's be clear, that is not the same as the religious freedom settlement that we have enjoyed and benefited from for many, many years in this country, where the public square is a place where you have freedom to follow your religious convictions, where at times that will lead to public demonstration and public action. And I think the other thing for me that I was particularly struck by was when we pray as Christians that the Lord's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. There is a very real sense in which we are praying for the Lordship of Christ to be owned and acknowledged in every corner of this country.
Yeah.
Now, if that isn't a prayer for domination, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Now, the key, and I'm sure this is what you're going to go on to say, the key is to remember what Jesus did when Peter drew out his sword at the moment of Jesus' arrest and smote the ear of the servant of the high priest. And Jesus said, put your sword away. Now, I don't think he was just saying, put your sword away because Jesus knew his hour had come and he had to follow through. But I think it was also symbolic of an entire way of understanding how the gospel and the message of Christ was going to spread. That it was not going to spread through political means alone. It was not going to spread through the force of armies. It was going to spread through conversion, not through coercion. And I think that's the difference between Christianity and the dominion that we seek is a dominion of hearts and minds that are one to the lovely Lord Jesus Christ. It's not through forced adherence to a religious system that we fundamentally disagree with. So I found it funny that there was this talk about this as an act of domination. I think, well, I mean, I'm praying for domination every single Sunday, just not in the same way.
Well, yeah, I think that is true. I think when you look at most of the major world faiths,
yes,
they are actually exclusionary.
Yes.
And I think in some ways I often think lots of politicians almost live in the world of 20 years ago, when there was this myth that all the religions could coexist peacefully, and we all basically believe the same thing, although, of course, none of us actually thought that.
No.
When actually, by their very nature, the different faiths exclude one another.
Yes.
So, as a Christian, I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I do not believe in that Muhammad is a prophet. I do not believe in Allah, etc. If you were to look at someone who is Jewish, or you look at, say, Isaiah 41 to 45, and it's all about how there is one God, Yahweh.
Yes.
As you say, these are exclusionary beliefs.
That's right.
And that was one of the things which, I don't know whether you read Nick Timothy's longer explanation.
Yes, I did.
Telegraph as well.
Yes.
But when he was talking about dominance and he particularly used that word exclusion. And I was thinking, you don't actually understand what these different things mean.
But this is so often the way, and I think this is increasingly becoming a feature of our political discourse and political debate. So I read Fraser Nelson on his Substack, who was very appreciative of the former rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I think he talked about the dignity of difference, and I think in these 20 years ago, I think difference was seen as a strength. I think it's increasingly seen as a weakness now. And at the same time, he had this line. He said, "So we see Christianity being enlisted in politics to advance a new narrative that Western way of life is under attack by both the woke left and the Muslims. This is how you build a new political movement. Sell victim versus oppressor narratives. For those on the right peddling identity politics, the crucifix is now the must-have political accessory." And now you can tear that apart, agree with bits, disagree with other bits, but that was a very helpful summary for me of what I think is playing out more and more. That there are elements on the right who are co-opting Christianity, its symbols, because what they really want is they want a Britain of yesteryear, where mass immigration is stopped, where multiculturalism is ended, where religious pluralism is stopped. And I think it's so important to come back to how did the early church look to engage and respond under an oppressive system? 1 Timothy 2, Paul says, pray for your leaders, that you may live quiet and godly lives in all holiness. It doesn't seem to me that the apostles were charging around trying to whip up, get your crucifixes out, come on, let's fight the political powers. That doesn't seem to me to be the way that Christians should respond to the moment now either.
Yeah, I think the other thing which I would come on to as well is I think almost at the heart of the row whether Muslims should have been able to hold this ceremony or not is the question of should God be allowed in public life?
Yes.
And I guess as Christians who work for an organisation which talks about politics renewed and lives being transformed and bringing God's better story to the world.
To our broken world.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We absolutely do believe that God is part of public life, and we don't believe that you can just switch your worldview on or off. And so, again, I read some stuff when we were preparing for this, which was like talking about how prayer should be done in public. So prayer should be done in private.
This is the old public versus private.
That's exactly it. And again, that's very much the world 20 years ago rather than the world of today.
But now, whereas before it was Christians keep your faith in private, now it's been directed at Muslims in this instance. And there has been an increase in hate crimes reported against Muslims. There has also been a rise since 2023 in anti-Semitism.
Massively,
And so I think it is important to say, I think what is coming down the tracks for the evangelical church is the need to think through what is our theology of religious liberty and religious freedom.
Yeah.
What do we actually think biblically about these concepts? What do we think about a pluralist, multicultural society? How do we respond to those on the right who are using Christianity? Some, I think, sincerely, they're genuine brothers and sisters in Christ. Others, I think, are co-opting, who are using it to craft the narrative of broken Britain, immigration's the problem, other religions are the problem, let's get back to being British, to being a good Christian country. And I think we can bury our heads in the sands, but there's no point doing that. This is coming for us, and we need to be thinking. And what's encouraging me at the moment is I am seeing Christian scholars. Some have already done the work. We've talked before about the book by Mike Bird and N.T. Wright on the powers.
Jesus and the powers.
Jesus and the powers. But I'm also seeing a new generation of scholars and theologians grappling with this. And that encourages me because I think we need that. We need to be thinking through, if we're going to support religious freedom, religious toleration, why do we support it biblically? What's our justification? The other thing I thought is, so much of the narratives I see at the moment, there's a lot of fear around. And I think you mentioned this on the last podcast as being very helpful to you. And I've read it a lot since then. It is absolutely one of my favorite Psalms, Psalm 46. Yeah. And I'll just read the last bit actually. God says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." And we were having a start of our mission week at church last night, and we're listening to a missionary in a very dangerous part of the world. And there was an amazing moment. I actually asked, what Bible passages have comforted you? And they went, honestly, they're just trying not to think about the war. They're just thinking about Jesus and the work that needs doing to reach people with him, to tell people about Jesus. And I thought that's such a refreshing way. I was expecting this passage. And actually it was a really important reminder of let's get our priorities right. We don't need to be afraid. That's the key point, isn't it? Yeah. From Psalm 46, we don't need to be afraid. What a way to end.
I mean, there's plenty more we could cover, but I feel like we've gone on long enough.
We have. You're very patient with us. We do witter on, but if you enjoy our witterings, then please do like this particular episode, like our podcast, tell other people about it, share this message with others, and don't forget that later on in 2026, we're going to be doing a live recording of the Engage podcast in the Westminster area in an evening. We're going to be gathering as many of you as are willing and able to come to meet us, but also just to basically continue doing what you have been doing, to think about the big political issue and to work through together, what does the Bible say about this? How can we apply the word of God to public life? So really look forward to that. We'll be releasing details later in the year about that. Are you excited?
Absolutely.
I've done a very good job of hyping that one up, haven't I?
Well, if I wasn't excited before, James.
Oh, stop. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to talk about these things with you, Peter. Thank you. Yeah. I look forward to seeing you again after Easter. Happy Easter.
Thank you very much.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Hallelujah. Christ, together, Christ, the Lord is risen. Okay, just me. Do keep that in. Don't you dare take that out the podcast. And happy Easter to one and all. And we look forward to being back toward the end of April, hopefully from the new filming space in our renovated office. Look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye.
Take care.